Hello, welcome to the podcast AnonX. Today, we're plunging into a truly fascinating and often misunderstood corner of human history and psychology, the seven deadly sins, and the intriguing, sometimes terrifying demons associated with each.
Yeah, it's quite a topic.
We've pulled together some compelling sources, looking at everything from ancient Christian texts right through to modern psychological takes and even some pop culture stuff. Our mission: to unpack where these infamous vices came from, to really get into what they mean, meet the legendary demonic figures tied to them, and figure out why these ideas still resonate so much today.
It's a journey that tells us a lot, not just about historical beliefs, but also gives us some pretty deep insights into human nature and the complexities, really, of our own desires.
Absolutely.
You might actually be surprised by what's really driving these so-called sins and how they've been shown, differently over the countries. Let's unpack this for you.
Okay, so to start us off, what's the story behind these seven vices? This specific list, where did it actually originate?
Right. So the concept of the seven deadly sins, or sometimes called capital vices, it goes deep into Christian tradition, particularly Roman Catholicism.
Okay.
The roots, though, they actually trace back to the 4th century. There was a Christian monk in Egypt, Evagrius Ponticus.
Evagrius Ponticus, right?
Yeah, and he identified 8 logos, which basically means 8 evil thoughts or temptations. These were seen as like core failings.
8. Okay, so it started as 8, not the 7 we usually hear about.
Yeah.
That's interesting right there. How do we get down to 7?
Exactly. The list got streamlined later in the 6th century. Pope Gregory I, in his big work, Morals on the Book of Job.
Ah, Pope Gregory.
He basically took Evagrius's 8 and consolidated them into 7. He saw them as these primary behaviors that could, lead to lots of other sins.
Like gateway sins?
Sort of. And pride, for instance, that was often seen as the big one, the father of all sin. Then Thomas Aquinas, later in the 13th century, he expanded on it and really cemented its place in Christian teaching.
That's fascinating. So they aren't explicitly listed like the 7 deadly sins are in the Bible itself, are they? Because I feel like that's a common misconception.
You're absolutely right. That's a really common misunderstanding. The Bible talks a lot about sin, obviously, and it condemns all sorts of negative behavior.
Sure.
But it doesn't lay out the specific categorized list of 7. Proverbs 6 mentions 7 things the Lord hates, like a proud look, a lying tongue.
Right, I remember that passage.
And Galatians 5 lists deeds of the flesh, like immorality, envying, but they aren't labeled the 7 deadly sins. This grouping, it became more of a teaching tool, really important in the centuries before Bibles were easily available for everyone.
Makes sense. A framework for teaching morality.
Okay.
I've heard there's some nuance about how deadly they actually are. Theologically speaking, it's not quite like commit one and you're definitely doomed.
That's a really important point, actually. In some Christian traditions, there was a suggestion these heavy sins might not be forgivable if you didn't repent, could lead to damnation. However, the general biblical teaching is that pretty much all sins are forgivable. The big exception is like a total rejection of God's grace, basically blasphemy against the Holy Spirit.
Right.
So these deadly sins were seen more as powerful temptations, gateways, like you said. If you didn't deal with them, they could lead you to commit mortal sins, the kind that really break your relationship with God.
Gotcha. And it's not just about what not to do, is it?
Yeah.
There's a flip side, the virtues.
Yes, exactly. They're often paired very deliberately with the 7 holy virtues. It's about balance, not just stark right or wrong. Aristotle talked about finding the healthy mean.
The golden mean.
Right. So courage isn't having no fear, but it's also not being reckless. It's that sweet spot between cowardice and recklessness. The virtues offer a way to kind of counteract the pull of the sins.
It's amazing how deep these ideas run. And a huge part of the lore, for a lot of people, involves the demons, these powerful figures tied to each sin. Let's get into that, starting with the big one, the root of it all.
That would be pride. Superbia in Latin, it's pretty much always seen as the most dangerous sin, the one that kicks everything else off. It's basically having this massively overblown view of yourself.
Thinking you're better than others, or even equal to God.
Exactly. Or that you just don't need anyone else's help or advice, just pure self-inflation.
And it's demon, Lucifer, the ultimate symbol of that fall from grace. How did this, once revered angel get so tied up with pride?
Yeah, Lucifer. Often called the morning star. The story goes he was like the most beautiful, most powerful archangel, second only to God.
Wow.
But his pride, this belief that he could run heaven better, led him to rebel. And that rebellion led to his massive fall from heaven, turning him into a demon. It really cemented pride as the, quote, original sin.
It's such a powerful narrative.
And it's interesting, modern psychology might look at that excessive view of self, not just as arrogance, but maybe as a kind of desperate overcompensation, like covering up a deep fear of being invisible or not good enough.
Huh. That's a really interesting way to think about it. The original sin as a symptom. What about its traditional symbols? And the punishment?
Traditionally, pride is linked with the color purple. Symbols include horses, lions, peacocks, things seen as majestic or, well, proud.
Right.
The punishment, pretty harsh. Being tormented on a wheel, constantly ground against the floor. And the virtue that counters it is humility, humbleness.
Humility. Makes sense.
It's also worth mentioning some older Hebrew traditions see Lucifer in the Old Testament differently, maybe referring to a human king like Nebuchadnezzar, not a fallen angel. So there's layers to it.
Fascinating. Okay. From that internal sin of too much self-regard, let's move to the external. Wanting too much stuff. Greed.
Greed, yes. Avaritia. This is that insatiable desire for material things, wealth, power, whatever, often with zero regard for morality or how it affects others.
Just pure selfishness.
Yeah, hoarding wealth, no charity. It's seen as a gateway sin, too, because if you're greedy enough, you can justify almost anything to get more.
And the demon here is mammon. You know, in today's world, with all the focus on wealth and consumerism, feels like mammon might be working overtime, maybe?
Mammon, yeah, the demon of greed. The name mammon itself just means wealth or money in Hebrew. Later, it got personified as this demon, almost like money itself has this corrupting force.
Money is the root of all evil, kind of thing.
Kind of. Mammon is said to possess anyone with that uncontrollable thirst for riches. Makes them do anything for wealth, no conscience, no sharing. And you're right, it's easy to see parallels today. That constant chase for more, maybe driven by a fear of not having enough or thinking the stuff brings happiness.
A very modern demon in a way. What are its symbols in the punishment?
Its color is yellow. Symbol's a frog, interestingly enough.
The frog, okay.
And the punishment for greed is being boiled alive in oil. Pretty unpleasant, especially if you loved material comforts. The virtue to counter it is charity or compassion, helping others above just stacking up your own wealth.
Right. Okay, next up. What many see as the most, well, carnal sin? Lust.
Lust, yes, luxuria. This is about intense passion or longing, especially for sexual desires that are seen as inappropriate or just excessive. It's about self-indulgence, really, and often ignoring the dignity or honor of others.
It's not just about natural desire, but the uncontrolled, potentially harmful kind.
Exactly. Some religious views distinguish it clearly from, say, passion within marriage for procreation. This sin is more about unbridled desire that often exploits rather than connects.
And the demon linked to lust is Asmodeus.
Asmodeus, yes. He's often depicted in some pretty wild ways. Sometimes a three-headed monster bull, goat, and man heads riding a dragon with chicken feet.
Quite the image.
Legends say he actually came from Persia, not the usual Hebrew tradition for demons. And here's a weird twist. He's said to mess with couples trying to have kids, but also taught humans about arts, dance, and fashion.
Wait, hang on. Fashion. A demon of lust teaches fashion. How does that work? That's unexpected.
It is, isn't it? The idea, the lore suggests, is that Asmodeus might use things like fashion to encourage vanity, excess, focusing on outward appearances instead of inner goodness, all feeding that self-indulgent side.
Ah, okay. A subtle corruption through vanity. Makes a strange kind of sense.
It's like he twists creativity and connection into something self-serving. And again, thinking psychologically, maybe extreme lust could be seen as stemming from deep loneliness, seeking connection through superficial acts when real intimacy is missing.
That puts a whole different spin on things. What about its symbols and the punishment?
The color is blue. Symbols include snakes and bulls animals, often linked to primal urges.
Makes sense.
The punishment is pretty grim, being suffocated by sulfur and fire. Some accounts even mention castration. The virtue against it is chastity, or self-control, channeling that passion constructively.
Okay. From desiring pleasure to desiring what other people have. Envy.
Envy, right. Invidia. This is that intense feeling of wanting what someone else possesses. Their looks, their status, their success, anything. It can lead to hating yourself, wishing you were them, or even wanting bad things to happen to them, celebrating their failures.
It feels darker than greed, somehow. More personal.
It's often seen that way, yeah, like an evolution of greed and gluttony, but rooted in comparing yourself and feeling resentful.
And the demon is Leviathan, the huge sea monster. That name definitely brings up images of chaos and the deep sea. Are there stories of it fighting other mythical creatures?
Leviathan, absolutely. The demon of envy. Often shown as this massive sea serpent or dragon breathing fire, a primordial force of chaos.
Like for the Book of Job.
Exactly. Some myths say Leviathan was a fallen angel who was envious of humans because they could live on land and sea while it was stuck in the ocean. And yes, there are legends. One says Leviathan is so huge and powerful it actually hunts things like the Kraken, even though the Kraken's from Norse myth, not Hebrew.
Wow, Leviathan versus the Kraken. That's epic.
It really emphasizes Leviathan's immense power and sort of consuming nature. Just like envy can consume a person and destroy everything around them. And think about today, social media. Constant comparison culture. That's envy playing out right there, seeing curated perfection and feeling miserable.
A very clear modern parallel. What are envy's symbols and punishment?
Green is the color, famously. Green with envy. And the symbol is often a dog.
A dog. Interesting.
Yeah, the punishment is having your eyes sewn shut, kind of a cruel irony since envy starts with looking at what others have, or being dunked in freezing water. The virtue against it is kindness, wanting good for others instead of wanting what they have.
Kindness, okay.
Yeah.
From wanting what others have to just wanting too much of anything, gluttony.
Gluttony, yes, gulilla. This is about excessive consumption, ongoing consumption, not just food, though that's the classic example. It's any kind of overindulgence without restraint. An insatiable appetite.
It's not just enjoying a good meal, it's the excess.
Exactly. Thomas Aquinas even broke it down into 5 types. Eating too expensively, eating too much, eating too fussily prepared food, eating at the wrong times, or eating too greedily.
Wow, specific. And the demon is Beelzebub, Lord of the Flies.
Beelzebub indeed. He was supposedly once an angel who taught humans moderation in food, but then fell from grace himself due to excess.
The irony.
Right. He often appears as a giant fly, and he's linked to bringing disease wherever he goes. Think about it. Flies spread sickness, like cholera, dysentery.
Oh, so the Lord of the Flies thing is quite literal, linking him to disease and decay.
Very literal. It really cemented that image. And psychologically, maybe gluttony is like emotional starving, using excessive eating or drinking or consuming anything to try and fill some inner emptiness or find comfort when real emotional support is missing.
That resonates. What are the symbols and punishment for gluttony?
The color is orange. The symbol is a pig, which is pretty commonly associated with overeating. The punishment is pretty nasty. Being eaten alive by rats, toads, and snakes, or being forced to eat them. The virtue is temperance or moderation. Finding that balance, aiming for health, maybe serving others instead of just consuming.
Okay, from constant consumption to the opposite extreme, total inaction. Sloth.
Sloth, yes, acedia. This one's often misunderstood as just being physically lazy, but it's deeper. It's more like spiritual apathy. A failure to act, to use your talents, to do your duties, especially the good things you should be doing.
Like neglecting responsibilities, letting opportunities pass.
Exactly, letting time just drift by meaninglessly. No interest in making an effort or changing things for the better. It's often called a sin of omission, failing to do good.
And the demon for sloth is Belphegor.
Belphegor, right. He's actually described as being quite intelligent, an inventor, but one who gives humans weird, often useless or deceptive inventions.
The inventor demon for sloth. Seems counterintuitive.
It does, but the idea is maybe he encourages laziness by offering easy but ultimately hollow shortcuts, false promises. He was apparently an angel in charge of organizing heaven before he fell. And he's also known for revealing people's secrets. That's why he's often shown naked. He exposes what's hidden. Again, psychologically, maybe sloth isn't just laziness, but rooted in fear. Fear of failing, fear of humiliation if you try something so you just do nothing. It's self-protection through inaction.
Exposing secrets.
Yeah.
That is a weird twist for the demon of laziness. What's the symbol?
His color is indigo, and the symbol, surprisingly, is a goat.
A goat, not a sloth.
Nope, a goat. It throws people off, but that's the traditional association. The punishment for sloth is being thrown into a pit full of snakes. The virtue is diligence or zeal. Actually getting things done, putting effort into things, maybe helping others instead of just focusing on ease.
Okay, and that brings us to the last one. Maybe the most outwardly destructive. Wrath.
Wrath. Ira. This is intense anger, hatred that's completely out of proportion. It leads to revenge, violence, irrational prejudice. It's not just being angry. It's uncontrolled rage that can make people harm or even kill others for no good reason, just fueled by vengeance or pure destructiveness.
And the demon here is Satan, often called the king of all demons. Now, how is Satan different from Lucifer here? Because people often use those names interchangeably.
That's a really key distinction, and yes, they are often conflated, but in many traditions, they're seen as distinct. Lucifer's fall, remember, was primarily about pride.
Right.
Satan, on the other hand, is often portrayed as a separate entity, an adversary or accuser, the one who orchestrates things to test people's faith, like in the Book of Job.
Okay, so more of an active antagonist force.
Exactly. Some interpretations even suggest Satan's nature is inherently evil, maybe existing even before creation. Pure darkness, the direct opponent of God, whose main job is tempting humans away from good and causing chaos. Wrath, then, is like his main tool, his primary expression.
That makes sense.
And thinking about it today, maybe extreme wrath is like unprocessed anger, deep-seated grievances that, if they aren't dealt with, just explode into cycles of violence or retribution, whether that's physical or, like online hate mobs.
That really clarifies their different roles. What are Satan's symbols and the punishment for wrath?
His color is red, fittingly. Symbols are often a bear or other sharp-toothed, aggressive animals, reflecting that destructive nature. The punishment is being torn apart over and over again. The virtues against wrath are patience and forgiveness, understanding others, understanding your own impulses before lashing out.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered the sins and their demons. But these aren't just ancient history, are they? Their influence seems very much alive.
Oh, absolutely. You see references to the 7 deadly sins everywhere in modern culture. Books, movies, games. They're incredibly powerful archetypes for human flaws.
That's so true. I mean, thinking about pop culture, Reborn, Obis Varia, One Piece's 7 Warlords, even the Shazam movie uses them. But I think the movie 7 really stands out, doesn't it? How it explores these ideas.
Oh, 7 is a brilliant example. Yeah. It doesn't just name the sins, it dives deep into how they manifest in really extreme, disturbing human behavior, makes them feel incredibly real and relevant.
Yeah, it's visceral.
The killer, John Doe, he's almost like this twisted moral crusader, forcing people to confront the definitions of these vices and the absolute darkness that can come from letting them run wild. It really makes you think, these aren't just abstract concepts. There are potentials within us.
Definitely.
And what's also fascinating is how modern psychology kind of reframes these sins. The idea isn't necessarily that the behavior is inherently evil, but maybe it's an unfortunate first response to difficulty and distress.
So not just condemning them as bad, but looking at what's underneath the behavior. Can you expand on that a bit more? How does psychology see these, maybe beyond what we touched on for each sin?
Sure. Think of it like this. Pride, maybe it's not just arrogance, but a desperate reaction to feeling unseen. A need to feel important because deep down you feel insecure. Gluttony, maybe it comes from emotional starvation. Using excess consumption, food, drink, shopping, whatever, to find comfort when real love or security feels absent.
Right, filling a void.
Lust. Could it sometimes be about profound loneliness, where sex or obsession becomes the stand-in for connection because genuine affection is hard to find or accept?
Makes sense.
Sloth, maybe not just laziness, but rooted in that fear of failure we mentioned, fear of humiliation, so it feels safer to just withdraw and do nothing.
Protection through apathy.
And greed, that powerful urge to grab more than your share. Often it might be a reaction to feeling deeply deprived or vulnerable, a desperate attempt to gain control over your world by hoarding resources.
So what you're really saying is, instead of just labeling these behaviors as bad, understanding the emotional roots, the unmet needs driving them, could lead to a more, compassionate and effective way to deal with them, both in ourselves and others.
Precisely. It shifts the whole perspective, not just seeing bad people, but seeing people with unmet needs that are coming out in these less than ideal ways because maybe we haven't found better ways to cope.
That's a powerful thought.
And it leaves you with a pretty important question to ponder. If we really dig into the root causes of our own impulses, the ones we regret, what might we actually discover about ourselves? And how could that understanding lead to real growth, real change? Personally, and maybe even as a society.
That was a truly insightful deep dive into the 7 deadly sins and their demonic companions. It really is amazing how these ancient ideas still give us ways to understand ourselves, our desires, our struggles, even today.
Indeed. You might find yourself noticing echoes of these sins, or maybe those underlying unmet needs in your own life or just in the world around you. It's a surprisingly useful framework for reflection.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.